Oh. Hey, it looks like this week's movie's headed down the poop chute. So while I let that work itself out down there, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Jeff Arbuckle. I'm a B-movie proctologist and host of B-Movie Enema. Now, let me go get this week's title, and I'll have my trusty companion, Nurse Disembody, tell us a little bit about it. All right, so let's see what we have down here. Let's get these gloves on so I don't get any of the mess on me here. All right, let's see. All right. Okay, what do we got down here? Oh, man. Oh, this is an absolute mess down here. Oh my God, it's so gross. Oh, yeah, this is going to be a full cleansing this week. Oh, jumping Jeebus, this is bad. But, I do have this week's movie, so, all right. Oh, man. Oh, okay. All right, here we go, Nurse Disembody. Take a look at this and give everyone a quick little preview.
Oh, no. I'm not going to say anything about the shit. No way. You do it.
Yeah, but it's kind of your gig, isn't it?
You did that gig the last 2 weeks.
I mean, yeah, but...
But nothing. I'm not doing anything with this one. In fact, I think I'm taking this week off. Good luck and don't call me. I'll be back next week.
Okay, well, I think Nurse Disembody is still kind of upset with me for that whole thing last week with the shackles and the what have you. So, I guess let me just play you a part from the trailer?
An adventure across space and time.
This is Penal Planet Terranus 7. We confirm the escape of Secundus.
If he mates, the co-mater will be born. The boy may be capable of unconsciously computing the anti-life equation. Have you sent a finder after him? I sent Abraxas.
He's a cub whose beat spans 2 galaxies. Abraxas.
Can Abraxas stop the renegade? Abraxas can handle it. He's brought Secundus in before.
His presence is causing a problem with students.
My son is normal.
2 super beings in an all-out fight over 1 small boy and 1 large planet Earth.
You are my son.
Their fight will decide our fate. Abraxas.
Okie dokie, so Abraxas, Guardian of the Universe. Now, this isn't just a bad movie, it's more of an odd one. It's not so much what the movie is that makes it odd and interesting, but what it actually invokes. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. This was directed by Canadian filmmaker Damien Lee, and he directed a couple of dozen B-movie flicks, and most of them have been something on the order of action, but he's done a few comedies too. Lee started as a bare-knuckle fighter in Peru before eventually getting into making movies. Abraxas and Ski School are probably his best-known movies. In the 90s, he cranked out something like 10 movies, but did so by making 2 in 1990, then 3 in both 1995 and 1996, and then 2 more in 1997. He's basically one of those video store guys, right? Like, he's just pumping out quick hit titles that can be sold on the cheap to video store distributors. Interestingly, he produced a great deal many movies, and one of those just happens to be the 5th installment of a very notable series, Death Wish 5: The Face of Death. He also produced the Corey Haim horror movie Watchers that is somewhat interesting in its own right. But despite the movies he directed himself, really, Death Wish and Watchers are really the only notable movies that I know anything about. Overall, his movies' titles all sound like they want to fuck you up real bad. You've got Space Rage, Last Man Standing, Thunderground, Last Resort, Street Law, No Exit, Deadly Heroes, and Baby on Board. I mean, it just sounds like they all just really really want to punch you in the face, so you probably don't want to fuck with Damian Lee. Alright, so I think I'm going to go ahead and get this turd rolling. I'm planning on diving deep into a couple of ideas over the next 2 segments, but for now, let's get into the first act of Abraxas, Guardian of the Universe, starring Jesse Ventura. Yes, this stars not just the body, but also the mind, and Sven-Ole Thorsen. I look forward to seeing you back here in just a bit. Okay, so here we have a virgin birth, aliens or time travelers or something, basically seeking out the woman and her impossible child, and lots of other sci-fi shenanigans. But let's talk about the people in Abraxas, Guardian of the Universe, yes? So, obviously, the biggest and most recognizable person in this movie is, of course, Jesse Ventura. Now, Ventura was born James George Janos in 1951 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And this is a guy who has what really kind of comes down to being 3 full-time careers in his lifetime. Now, his first was as a pretty popular and successful wrestler. And he started doing that in the 1970s when he returned from Vietnam. And this was before the WWF that I knew when I was growing up. This was when wrestling leagues were mostly regional. There were a few that would expand viewership outside their region, but not really. Each of the regions would have their own stars and local followings. And this was certainly true with Ventura, and he started in the Central States leagues that were around before moving out to the Pacific Northwest. There, he took on the likes of Jimmy Snuka and won titles a couple of times, and he was also a champion tag team wrestler. He eventually came back to Minnesota and joined the American Wrestling Association, and he again became a multiple tag team champion. He and his partner at the time would lose their championship belts before moving over to the World Wrestling Federation in the early 80s. And after losing 3 times in a row to Hulk Hogan, Ventura decided to hang it up, but stayed with the WWF to become a color commentator. And as a commentator, Ventura was actually pretty unique. In both of his matchups with Vince McMahon and then later Mean Gene Okerlund, Ventura was still basically portraying his villainous persona. He had this, he was a heel basically, and he carried that over, and he often spoke very favorably of the other bad guys, while McMahon and Mean Gene typically sided with the heroes and the fan favorites. To be perfectly honest with you, Ventura's teaming with Mean Gene is a particular memory of mine. I never was really a huge fan of wrestling, but it was impossible to avoid it growing up in the 80s. But Ventura and Okerlund are really etched in my mind. Now, Ventura then moved on to movies. In 1987, Ventura scored big in 2 Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, Predator and The Running Man. And what's funny is that he's got those 2 roles and Abraxas, but after that, he was mostly either playing himself or had very small roles. But he continued to be in really big movies like Demolition Man and Batman and Robin, but his characters in those movies have no real official character name. More than anything, he was mostly a visage and not really needed to be fleshed out as a character, I suppose. But of course, in 1998, he won an election in plurality to become Minnesota's 38th governor. Now, I mentioned that he won in plurality, and that just means that he didn't hold a majority of the vote. He won narrowly and unexpectedly against a Republican and a Democrat. But it wasn't his actual first job in political standing. He started in 1991 as a mayor of a small town called Brooklyn Park in Minnesota. He then decided to run in 1998 as part of the Reform Party, which was the party created by Ross Perot. He considered himself as something of a fiscal conservative and a social liberal, which I think would probably squarely place him in what we would call the moderates or the center today. Anyway, the big problem that he faced as governor was that he had no other party members in the state legislature. So he had very little opportunity or support for anything that he might want to achieve. He finally decided not to run for re-election, citing that his dedication had kind of run out, and was frustrated with the media trying to make hay out of more personal things about him as opposed to the policy issues that he felt was far more important. Okay, so another recognizable face in this is our villain Secundus. Now, he's played by Sven Ole Thorsen. Now, Thorsen is from Denmark and was a bodybuilder and strongman competitor. He's appeared in a massive amount of Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, and he was also in Predator and The Running Man with Ventura. Mostly, though, Thorsen is a stuntman, and he was very, very close with Schwarzenegger. I mean, look at this. He's just palling around, broing out with his buddy Arnold. Just a couple of beefy slabs of meaty men all greased up, just chilling, I guess. I don't think that this is all that weird. I mean, guys hang out constantly in tiny short shorts and bare-chested. I mean, it's just what us tough guys do. Oh man, look at this. Just a couple of real manly men just riding a horse together really, really closely without a whole bunch of clothing. Just dudes being dudes, am I right? What's so wrong with that? I mean, it looks like they're having a good time together going for that ride. I don't know if that horse is enjoying these two beefy dudes riding its back, but whatever. It's just dudes being dudes. The last notable person that I want to call out in this is the cameo put in by Jim Belushi. Now, of course, he's the brother of John Belushi, who died young after a great career in comedy. Jim Belushi's okay. While he's done a lot of movies and TV work on things that I'm not a huge fan of, I'm not going to knock the dude. He's carved out a little bit of a nice career for himself, and that's pretty cool. But here, there's something kind of interesting to point out. In 1987, he was in a movie called The Principal, and he played the character Rick Latimer. Now, in that movie, he plays a teacher with a bit of an anger problem and a little bit of a drinking problem who gets shuttled to one of those inner city schools with lots of gangs and promoted to principal. Now, there, he can use his more anger-induced tactics to clean up the school and get rid of the gangs. It's a very old school, no pun intended, idea that wouldn't fucking fly today. But I bring this up because in Abraxas, randomly, he is listed as playing Principal Rick Latimer. Is he the same guy? I don't know. I don't know if I care all that much. I will say that I do like the idea of being a teacher in the inner city and a principal, and then after he got rid of those drugs and gangs, he now has to deal with this alien and all this talk about anti-life equation. But anyway, let's get back to the movie, and when we come back after the next segment, I'm going to be talking much, much more about this anti-life equation. So stick around, won't you? Alright, so let's dig into this anti-life equation business. Now, this will help me flex some of my comic book knowledge as well as my interest as well in the medium. But we first have to start with iconic comic book artist and creator Jack the King Kirby. Now, Kirby was born in 1917 and he got into comic strips in 1936, which then transitioned into the new boom of superhero comics by the end of the decade. Now, his first major creation was with fellow artist and writer Joe Simon, and of course that would be Captain America. And the first issue of Captain America comics would hit newsstands about 11 months before the United States officially entered World War II. But it didn't stop Kirby from drawing that iconic image of Cap socking Hitler right on the jaw. And you see, the reason for this was Kirby was a Jewish man. He wasn't an idiot and knew exactly what was going on with Hitler's plans in Nazi Germany and whatnot. Apparently, in America, there were Nazi sympathizers, and they came to the New York offices of Timely Comics, which would later become Atlas Comics, and then finally Marvel Comics, to protest. And as they protested outside, Kirby was ready to roll up his sleeves, go downstairs, and fight him some fucking Nazis. But Joe Simon had to basically talk him out of that. Anyway, Kirby and Simon would eventually go to rival National Comics, which itself would someday become DC. But then Kirby was drafted into World War II, and there he was working as a scout because his CO knew that he was an artist, and so he would be sent out ahead and then draw the terrain to send back to the platoon. But after the war, Kirby returned to doing comics with Joe Simon, but eventually the pair went their separate ways. And Kirby would work for DC Comics for a short bit and then return to Atlas where he'd team up with the younger Stan Lee. DC had superheroes at the time and Atlas wanted the exact same thing. In the 60s ended up becoming all about Lee and Kirby racking up incredible amounts of stories, characters, and comics that are still in regular publication today. But I'm sure if you know anything about Marvel Comics, you already knew that. Now, in 1970, Kirby moved over to DC, and his first major creation there was a series of interconnected titles that would basically be called the Fourth World. And in the Fourth World moniker, Kirby created these new space characters that were very similar to the character set of Greek mythology. These characters would be called the New Gods, and the good ones came from New Genesis, and the bad guys came from a place called Apocalypse. And the primary hero of this run was Orion, who was the son of the villainous leader Darkseid. Now, Kirby's Fourth World is a very fascinating concept. The 70s were an extremely interesting period of creation for Kirby. His imagination was pretty boundless, to be honest with you. He had cosmic concepts that I don't think people with the most powerful hallucinogens would have ever dreamt of. And the New Gods and the various other spin-off factions of those characters were a big part of his long-lasting contribution to DC Comics. Now, let's dig in a little deeper into that now, shall we? So as I said, the primary villain in the New Gods corner of the DC universe is the big baddie Darkseid. Now, most people in the modern era would probably know who Darkseid is by now, because he has grown into basically being the biggest existential threat to the DC universe for the better part of the last 12 to 15 years. But if we were to put the New Gods into literal godhood, I suppose Darkseid would represent the devil. But interesting thing is about that is that the New Gods aren't actually deities. They're just cosmically powered creatures. Now, Darkseid's main goal in life is to capture the entirety of what's called the anti-life equation. And in the world of DC, exactly what the anti-life equation is has changed over the years. But in the last 15 years or so, it's been commonly interpreted as the mathematical proof of the futility of living. That's pretty fucking dark, eh? It's basically a way to prove that happiness is fleeting and toil and misery are constant. To live is to struggle, and to struggle is inevitable. Only one conclusion exists in life, which is death. For these past handful of years, Darkseid's whole existence is to capture all the various pieces of the anti-life equation, and he already has some of it, but doesn't know where the rest of it is, but knows that a lot of it exists someplace on Earth. Now, originally, Kirby did create the anti-life equation to basically be this thing that would dominate the will of all sentient species. The thinking was that if someone had absolute control over you, then you're not really alive, so therefore you're anti-living. A handful of stories have depicted times in which Darkseid has either gained a new piece of it or actually completed the equation and unleashed it into the population of Earth, turning half the humans into slave labor force, or basically force everybody to exist solely for him. And that example comes from the most famous story to feature that, which was the very divisive Final Crisis story. And in that, Darkseid pretty much wins and nearly destroys all of the DC universe in doing so. It's a really bizarre story and a very complicated one to follow. However, some concepts to arise from the story feature the realization that really the only thing that matters is to basically subjugate yourself to Darkseid. There are ways to break control of the equation and ways to make yourself immune to it, but it's one of the most powerful things in all of the DC universe. Now, how does all of this relate to Abraxas, Guardian of the Universe? Well, I really don't know. I have to believe that Damian Lee was a fan of Kirby's work. Not to mention, this features a character hell-bent on discovering the equation and a powerful race of aliens that are very old and kind of going about their own business in their own corner of the cosmos until the Secundus Dirk goes to Earth. And on top of that, there is a device in the Kirby Fourth World stuff that's called a mother box. And these are sentient things that do all sorts of stuff. Like they open up these things that are called boom tubes that allow for you to go to various points in the universe. They work as smartphone-like devices to dispense information and knowledge, and basically anything else that you might have written yourself into a corner on. Well, I bring up the mother boxes because in this movie, Secundus and Abraxas have what they call answer boxes that operate kind of similarly in terms of that they are sentient and dispense knowledge and information about stuff. But I can't say for sure that Damian Lee is, but I have to believe with a high degree of certainty that he originally created Abraxas to be a fourth world type of movie. And it should also be pointed out that it has been a long believed rumor that the Masters of the Universe movie that was made in the late 80s was also developed originally to be a fourth world movie. It's a concept that filmmakers really want to turn into a film because up to a certain point, Warner Brothers had even intentions to create a fourth world movie themselves. All right, so let's get back to the final act of Abraxas, Guardian of the Galaxy, and I'll see you after the movie. Okay, so that was Abraxas, Guardian of the Universe. It's really not a very good movie, but I also kind of admit that it's not uninteresting, and it doesn't really have a bad premise for something that would probably play out pretty well in a comic book format. Maybe Lee was a significant fan of comics. I mean, a big thing about this movie is that it's really heavy with exposition dialogue. At the very top of the movie, we hear about a process in which Abraxas kind of people are trained to make them tough or whatever. And then we have the exposition about Abraxas and Secundus being farmer partners and friends and all of that. And we have exposition about Secundus's goal. All of this is in the first 10 minutes of the movie. Now, a lot of this would probably be relayed in a comic through internal dialogue or caption boxes. There's lore here that could make for an interesting plot to something. The problem is that the movie ultimately is just kind of flat. Ventura and Thorson are not very human in this. I mean, they are aliens, but they're doing that whole kind of flat tone, almost higher being kind of speak. And at least they use contractions because that's a terrible trope when it gets overused by like alien or robots or whatever. And it's just, it doesn't really make them all that very human or feel like they have a personality. But Ventura has a compelling personality too. That's what's kind of baffling about this movie. He gets to use a little bit of that in his various voiceovers that, again, if this was a comic, would be good caption boxes to tell, the readers about stuff in a world building sort of way. And this movie is loaded with world building. But when he's acting with other people in the room, he just seems uncomfortable. And oddly, he was already in Predator and The Running Man by this time that he made this. So when it came to Predator, he seemed much more suited for that role. But Abraxas is kind of an action role too. So what gives? But, Thorson is actually a little bit better in this. He has that one scene where he blows that one guy's head up and then has a pretty good one-liner afterwards. But there is this one other thing that I actually do like in this movie that Ventura does. First, he's a decent fish out of water type of character, and he's just kind of this big dummy, right? So he stops a camper and politely requests transportation. Then he's trying to explain to this family what he's doing and what his answer box can do and all of that. And then when they drop him off in town, he just awkwardly says that he has to go find Secundus and then just goes booking down the street. It's just very goofy. I have to believe that it was a real comedy moment, but I don't know. I really don't know. This movie is just kind of confusing in that way. But that said, when he kisses Sonia, that's just awkward, man. But then again, there's this whole other element of this small town, and you really get to know some of these other characters in this movie too. And it's fascinating in a way that this movie feels fully built and fleshed out in terms of characters and this lived-in feel to the town. But you know, like you have this new cop in town that thinks he's a badass and he's by the book and all of that, but he's kind of a goofball also. He's into Sonia, and it seems like that she's kind of into him too, but then Jesse Ventura comes to Earth and she's like, you know, that's the exact rat tail and male pattern baldness that I am looking for in man meat. I don't know. When you boil it all down, the thing is with Abraxas is that it's just a little bit of the Terminator and a little bit of Jack Kirby. It's both derivative and fascinating, but the equation really doesn't allow for Abraxas to pass muster. You know, I haven't talked too much about her yet in this, but our leading lady and the virgin mother of this kid that Secundus is after is Sonia. And Sonia is played by Marjorie Bransfield. Now, Bransfield for a time was Jim Belushi's wife. So he did this movie as a favor to her. And she may be the most consistently endearing part of this movie. I mean, she gets kicked out of her house for having this kid that she did not screw anybody in order to get pregnant with. Then she has to kind of raise this, for a lack of a better term, special needs kid all by herself. And this part of the movie does have a little emotion to it that doesn't make this that much of an alien movie whenever she's on screen. Oh, well, look who the cat dragged in. I thought you were gone for the entirety of this week's episode, Nurse.
Well, you were finished watching it, so I thought I should at least come back and tell people about where the website and all the other episodes can be found.
Hey, you know what? That's an excellent idea, Nurse, if you don't mind.
You can find all of Jeff's writings and upcoming episodes at www.bmovieenema.com. You can follow the page at Facebook and Twitter and check out episodes on YouTube. If you have a Roku, get OtherWorlds TV and check him out along with all the other hosts that appear there on weekends.
Hey, thank you, Nurse. I really did miss you this episode. I did end up getting an intern to take care of the mess at the old poop shoot, but while he did that, I was able to ramble on about comic books and Jesse Ventura and Sven Ole Thorson. I kind of think that I really kind of brought the goods this time around.
I'm sure you did.
Hey, so there are only 2 episodes left of this season. The good news is that I'm having a season finale, not a series finale. More to come on that, but for now,
I must locate Secundus. Good luck!